Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this is a podcast here that I do in two different forms. First of all, it is available in a video visual form here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. Or if you want to take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to, like an actual podcast, simply look up ModChat, all one word, on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform. I know it's not available on all of them, but it should be available on most of them. Either way, this is a podcast where I come on here and I tell you all about some things that I find interesting, cool, maybe do a little bit of show and tell in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. It's not necessarily a news show, it's more just things that I find interesting that have been kind of newer developments that come up, but if you want to use this as a news show, feel free to do so, as long as it's entertaining to you. Either way, with the intro out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump right into the topics here, because we got some pretty surprising and pretty cool stuff this month for you. So probably the biggest development that a lot of people have wanted me to cover in this regard here has been Tony Hawk's Pro String Copy. This is a new multi-level exploit, multi-console, even multi-generation exploit from developer Grim Doomer, as well as Rubber Duck Show, it seems, according to the contributors here. Now, in case this does sound familiar, Grim Doomer has done a lot of really awesome work. Some notable things have been, I know years ago on ModChat, probably the first big Xbox Live 1.0 reboot or successor, a big reverse engineering effort, was actually worked on by Grim Doomer. And of course, he also brought internal exFAT hard drive support to the PlayStation 2 scene. So the funny thing is, from what I've seen, this is actually based on an exploit that has been in development by him and found for several years at this point, but then he kind of ended up putting it on steroids, so to speak here. Just getting into it from the GitHub repository, he states here, Tony Hawk's Pro String Copy is a GameSave Network RCE exploit that can be used to hack several different game consoles, including Xbox, Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, and GameCube. This repository contains the exploit code and pre-made save game files, as well as RCE variants that can be used to hack certain game consoles remotely through network or LAN matches. This exploit is intended to be used for hacking your own console and educational purposes only. Please do not use it maliciously. Also note that this is not the only string copy bug that can be exploited over the network. Anyone still playing the exploitable Tony Hawk game should be extremely careful when using network play with people you don't know. And he goes into the detail here not only for the different consoles, but also how it exists, and states that in loading code for custom skate parks created with the Create a Park feature, the park editor allows players to create custom levels, and one of the features lets you create a gap, a skateboarding term for an area between two platforms one must jump over, and name it up to 31 characters. By maliciously crafting a custom gap name in the park file, you can trigger a stack heap overflow and get control of the CPU instruction pointer. This can then be used to start a ROP chain or execute shell code and further exploit the console for full code execution. This bug exists in several different versions of the game and can even be used over the network via LAN matches to remotely hack clients without the need for them to obtain the hacked save files. For detailed information on how the exploit works for each game console, see the notes in the exploit source files. And there's also a big blog post that he ended up covering on here about this. I'm not going to be going into this in particular here. However, he does get into the nitty-gritty over really how this was found, how he was able to reverse this, and get to it. But the cool thing is, there are some visuals here, which you can see from, well, the YouTube video. Now, he's done a great job covering this on the multiple different consoles and even different games that this works on. And you can see right here, for example, he's using Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, which if you've soft-modded an original Xbox in the last several years, you might be smiling a little bit here, because this game is actually an exploitable game save game that was revealed a few years ago when there was some exploits that was released, and it allows us to soft mod our system. Really, you're able to load up a custom park, and from there you can load up unsigned code, which most people of course use to load up a soft mod installer. But you're seeing it right here. He's just doing a basic thing where he is loading up a custom park. He loads up the save, screen ends up going to black, and instead of a soft mod installer, we get Neon Cat right here. So definitely not in the game, and that is a unsigned homebrew executable, which is running on the original Xbox. Thanks to this all here. However, the big difference here with Tony Hawk's Pro String Copy, you're going to see is right here he has 2 original Xboxes. And this here is actually the original exploit that he had worked on, to my understanding, for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, in which essentially you kind of got to think back to the Xbox 360. I'm pausing this again, but you got to think back to the Xbox 360 with Call of Duty infections and such. And if you don't know about that, for a while, you couldn't take a hard-modded system such as a JTAG back in the day online. So what you would do is you'd have 2 systems. You'd essentially have a modified system like this, like your JTAG, and then you'd have a retail system right here. You would connect them to each other on the same network, load into the same game, and essentially what you would do is you'd be running a modified version of the game on your, hard-modded Xbox, and then your retail Xbox is running a clean stock copy of the game. But then when you end up connecting to each other in a local match, the hacked Xbox ends up infecting the retail Xbox, and once it is infected, you're then able to use mod menus in which you can mess around in zombies, you can rank yourself up, you can do custom games, you can rank up and rank down other people online, so you're able to do that. From what I know, I think that method is still accessible, but it's pretty much deprecated now just because it's so easy to get a hard-modded Xbox 360 online, and you can actually last online now a lot more than you could before. But I'm saying that because what people would do is they did this same idea here where they took a hard modded system with the hacked version of the game and they would use it to infect a clean system with a clean copy of the game. And once it was modified, at that point, you could go online. The thing is, though, it wasn't a soft mod, and the infection itself was not persistent. So if the game crashed, if you turned off the console, if you exited the game, that's it. Your mod menu is gone, and then you have to reinfect the system. So that's essentially the same logic here, where he is going into System Link. He's got a modified system right here, and let's say he has a clean system right here. He starts the game on the modded system. On the clean system, he joins in, he's going around here, and if you wait a little bit, you'll be able to see that there's going to be a little bit of a crash. Actually, it changed right here already. You see the orange light. There we go. We have the crash to black, and then we have unsigned code. So this was the original exploit that he was doing for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Now, technically it has been released now. He didn't release it prior, and he even admits in the video here that it's a little bit late for this exact implementation, because it would have been cool to use either a hard-modded or soft-modded original Xbox to modify a stock original Xbox. However, he even admits that this was several years ago, and since then, original Xbox disk drives are kind of dying off left and right, so now it's not... So now this implementation is cool, but it's not going to be as usable, especially with endgame, where at this point with endgame, you don't need another Xbox, you don't need an exploit game. Really, as long as you have a working Xbox and you can get a storage device recognized on the system itself, and you can put some game saves on there, that's enough to modify your system. It's a completely diskless exploit. Not this one though, but what he did was, even though this was great, he ended up using this really as a starting point and foundation, so to speak, and was able to build up on it, and he built upwards quite a bit. For example, right here, he is doing the exact same thing on a completely separate system, which this is pretty cool to see here. He's got a PlayStation 2, it is not modified, and it's running a stock copy of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, and he has it hooked up to his network, where over on his network he's got PCSX2, which is playing this same copy presumably here of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. He does the exact same thing as before, where he goes in, he starts a LAN match on the modified version, so to speak. As long as you have a method of getting a modified PlayStation 2 save onto a memory card, you're able to do that. And then from here on the completely stock system, he's then able to join that local network match. So we can just wait a little bit here. As you can see, it's loading in, and it's cool. I love seeing this. It's just exciting overall. So also kind of cool to see that you can join the same game between an emulator and the original hardware right here. But you can see the game is running, and in the background, even though he's just like messing around and playing the game itself, there is code running in the background to get this all working, which you can see the game end up crashing once it's able to execute. And here we go. We now have a U launch elf or W launch elf that is up and running. So again, you're now able to run unsigned code through this on the PlayStation 2. Now, is this how you might want to run unsigned code? Maybe, maybe not. But not only the concept of this is really cool, but also if you're in a position where you're able to get your system onto your network itself, you have, in this case here, you could take the disk, you could rip it onto your computer, and you can play and emulate a copy of it, get it all onto your network, and then use this to infect your PS2, so to speak. And keep in mind, this is not persistent right here, but if you can get it to launch some homebrew, from here, the cool thing is you can utilize this to install FreeMcBoot, install Funtuna, install OpenTuna, and have something that is more persistent on the memory card itself. So another super cool thing to see right here. Now that's 2 consoles down, but we have 2 to go. So the third console here is going to be the GameCube. Again, the same game, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, but you could see right here that this time around he's not going over the network on this one. He's actually going to be using a save file exploit, which was more common on the GameCube years ago. The nice thing is there are different methods and some that have gotten better on here, such as PlayStation 2. Instead of doing this, you could do free DVD boot. I know the GameCube has some other cool options that are available. I kind of need to dust off that knowledge a bit. But you can see the same thing here. He's loading up a modified park. It's going to load in right here. So this one is more local. It's not going to be over the network itself, but waiting a bit. And there you go. Instead of loading the park, it ended up loading Swiss. From here, you could use this to launch more homebrew. In this example, from your memory card slot 2, you can use this to launch ISOs as well. You can throw in a SD2 SP2 and launch them that way. So again, a really awesome proof of concept, and we're able to see this up and running and in action. But in terms of what you might want to do with this, I guess, day to day, I'm sure most people wouldn't want to go through this process every single time they want to launch their GameCube into a modified state. But again, I just love being able to see this here and seeing this here all in action because, you know, I'd rather get an exploit like this than, you know, nothing at all. Now, the big one here that people wanted me to cover was the Xbox 360, and there were a few things that I wanted to cover on this. This here is not Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. This one is actually using Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. And this here is using the Xbox 360, and it is able to show that using software only, you can run unsigned code on the Xbox 360. Something that you really haven't been able to do for years and years at this point, just because of the hypervisor. I actually tell people, even though they say, oh, almost all models of the 360 have been hacked because, you know, the Winchester, there's no public available method for it in terms of like RGH or anything, but all the motherboards prior to that you can modify is what I'm saying. But people have wanted a soft mod for the Xbox 360 for so long, and I'll say this here, this is essentially using something similar that we've seen before, but it's not going to be a soft mod. So I kind of want to dispel that. Because first of all, you need a really old dashboard for this, which Grim ends up covering in this video. He showed that this system is stock, and the only modification he's really done is downgrade the dashboard to the... I will go back here real quick. He downgraded it to... Here we go, this kernel, 4532. So I'm going to take a pause on there real quick because over on 7sins, there is a thread here from Nuber, which kind of builds off some of the work that UberGeek did over at the Team Executor forum. Rest in peace to that. But just going down here, this covers the history of Xbox 360 dashboard updates. And for example, 7371, that legendary update where this is the latest update you can run on a system in order to JTAG it. Because you can see right after that, 8498 fixed a vulnerability used to run arbitrary code. But we have to go back even further than that. 4548 would be the most recent dashboard for a software-only modification for the 360. But you can see here in 4552, it was patched on January 9th, 2007, fixed a privilege escalation vulnerability in the hypervisor that allowed non-signed code such as Linux to run on the Xbox 360 with direct hardware access. I know some people are probably just thinking, wait, what? They haven't heard about that, but it's been around for a while. But what I'm saying here is if you don't have the know-how to downgrade your Xbox 360, because It's not like that Xbox One and Xbox Series exploit that I had talked about before, where you kind of had a narrow window of time to get in. Technically, there's more exploitable systems out in the wild for the 360, and there's ways of even making a system exploitable and getting it downgraded to that dashboard. However, I will say it's probably a lot more time and effort and money than a lot of people are wanting to put into the 360. So even if a soft mod does come from this, it's going to be on a really old dashboard. It's going to be limited because you got to realize right here, essentially, if you have a console that has been updated in 2007 or later, you're out. That's it. That console is no longer exploitable unless you go through these steps to downgrade it to an exploitable kernel, which that's what Grim Doomer ended up doing. And the exploit that we had seen before, which I'm referencing, is the King Kong shader exploit. And they state here on the IVC wiki, December 23rd, 2006, at the 23C3 Hacker Congress in Germany, an anonymous hacker presented a vulnerability in the Xbox 360 using the King Kong game and a MacBook Pro connected to a serial to USB cable. Later in February, the exploit was revealed on Security Focus with full details. The release was delayed to allow Microsoft to patch the problem. The exploit uses a bug in the hypervisor to allow unsigned code execution. A shader in the King Kong game was used to perform the exploit and load arbitrary code with full privileges and full hardware access, example to run Linux. And to show this process here, because this isn't going to be all about the King Kong exploit, but just as a heads up here, essentially what you would need to do is you would need a stock copy of the King Kong game itself. You would then need to either have a 0800 drive or a Creon drive, or use some other method such as like essentially hot swapping your drive with WX Ripper and such. I did that back in the day to rip the game to an ISO. So you're seeing here they're using Xbox Backup Creator to make a backup of their King Kong game. From here, you need to get the King Kong shader exploit for Zell file. So it comes with a few different files right here, and it's pretty simple to run. What you need to do is use command prompt to run the win patch executable, and you need to use that to patch your King Kong ISO, your clean ISO that you have ripped. At that point, then you can take that modified ISO image and then you burn it like a standard Xbox 360 game onto a dual layer disk. However, in order to run this here, you have to have either dashboard and kernel version 4532 or 4548. Those are the only two that this is going to work on. So you have to make sure your system is on one of those two dashboards. And if your goal is going to be running Linux here, you will have to burn a live CD, which is specific for this. Now you can see here, these are screenshots from an old video on the right, but the other thing that is not covered at all in this is that in order to run that burned copy of King Kong, you have to also flash the DVD drive with custom firmware that will allow it to run burned Xbox 360 games. Once you do that, however, you're on an exploitable kernel, you have your flash DVD drive, and you have your modified game. You pop it in the console, you make sure it runs, and then when you get to the press start to continue screen, you can press the start button, and from what I remember, the screen goes to black. It ends up ejecting the disk automatically, in which you can put in your Linux live CD, pop it in, it will spin up, and then it will start booting up Linux, and you have the Linux kernel running on your system. This all, what I'm saying here, like this here, if you haven't heard of it, if you haven't looked into it before, this was done back in 2006. Now, the reason why I went on that tangent is because, one, it was related to this, and two, it is absolutely not to diminish Grim Doomer's work. It was more to explain this further, because we're now bouncing back to the present with Tony Hawk's Pro string copy, and why this is really cool. Because number one, he's showing this dashboard is on a exploitable version, but number two, you're going to see right here, if you saw him pop it in, that remember that whole bit I talked about where I said you have to dump a copy of King Kong and you have to patch it and you have to flash your DVD drive to run burned games? Look at this right here. He's not running a burned version of the game. This here is a completely original store-bought copy of Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. Different game right here. Yeah, this is different games as well too. But you can see he's got a exploitable stock system, he's got a hard drive hooked up, and he has the DVD drive plugged in with a official copy of the game. Now, the hard drive itself has some modified files on it, so that is one of the differences as opposed to modifying the disk drive itself. You have to put the files on the hard drive, which there's plenty of ways of doing that in the modern day for the 360. But right here, he's going to create a park, loading the park, and I believe he even said that he pretty much used the same method here for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 on the Xbox. here on the Xbox 360, despite the 360 having much better security. But you can see there is a hack Xbox save, so he's going to go ahead and load this up here. It loads in. You have to wait a little bit. Well, let's see, load successful. All right, he's going to play it. And there we go. We have the red lights. And we have this demonstration right here, which shows that this is unsigned code running on the Xbox 360. So the reason why I was referencing the King Kong exploit is because not only this has kind of been built off of the foundation of that before, but this here is on a different level, because assuming you have everything stock right here, you have a system that's never been opened up, it's on a exploitable kernel, and you have a stock copy of the game. As long as you can get a file or a few files onto the hard drive and load in that save, this is it right here. This is a completely software-based exploit for the Xbox 360 that doesn't even require you to open up the console. Now, I know when I'm saying software-based exploit and 360, people are thinking of a soft mod, and I will say this, Grim Doomer has even stated in here that you probably won't be able to get much further than this without a hypervisor exploit. And that, I will say, software-wise is the big difference between this and the King Kong exploit. The King Kong exploit ended up exploiting shaders in the game, which allowed for a hypervisor exploit. And this here is really cool. It is a save game exploit, and you do have unsigned code running right here, but the hypervisor is not broken if you end up using Tony Hawk's American Wasteland and you use this here. Near the end here, he also talks about this and states that with enough time and determination and probably resources looking into this here, you could certainly probably evolve this into something more. I personally don't think too much more will come of this, unfortunately, just because, like I said, you're going to need this game, you're going to need the console, and need to be on a really old kernel version here. He is hoping that maybe this can lead to some research on finding a exploit on a higher kernel version. Unfortunately though, and fortunately in a way, he said he spent hundreds of hours hacking up this system, reverse engineering it. He's probably not going to work on this like a whole lot more here, so don't expect him to come out with like a hypervisor exploit or come out with like a soft mod or anything for the 360. Again, this is really awesome, and I'm not diminishing the work at all, but I'm more just level setting with people, because in the past month or so since this has been released, a lot of people have said, oh, there's a soft mod in progress for the 360, oh, there's going to be a soft mod soon, there's going to be a soft mod. No, that's not how it's gonna go. I'd absolutely love to be proven wrong, but that's probably just going to be the realistic option there. Going back to the release here, and then we'll kind of drop off of this, you could see there's several consoles that this does work on. So on the GameCube, for example, even though we were seeing a whole lot of love for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, you can see here that, well, on the GameCube, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 at the current moment in time is the only one, the NTSC version, that works with this, and it is a hacked game save. It's not a network RCE. Now, if we go to the PlayStation 2, for example, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 has been worked on. This is a network-related exploit, but not a save exploit. For the Xbox 360, only American Wasteland is on here, the NTSC version, and this here is a save game exploit, not network. And finally, for the original Xbox, we do have more efforts on here with the NTSC version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 working as a save exploit, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 all across the board for save exploits across all regions, and of course the network exploit. Tony Hawk's Underground 1 and 2, they state here, game compiled using stack cookies, stack buffer overflow is not possible. And then for American Wasteland, he ended up doing a save exploit on the Xbox, well, the original Xbox, which is nice because essentially, from what I've observed, he was able to take his work from Pro Skater 4 and do the same thing on American Wasteland on the Xbox, and then do the exact same thing for American Wasteland on the 360. The beauty of this being open source and a community like this, though, is that I'm currently seeing a pull request in which it states add Tony Hawk's Underground 1 GameCube exploit. You can see this from Cubified right here, and this person ended up actually making this exploit. Like, they were able to port it and they were able to make it work for Tony Hawk's Underground 1, the NTSC version on the GameCube right here. It looks like they have a pre-built save that includes the exploit, so it is still a save game exploit for Tony Hawk's Underground, the original one on GameCube. Grim Doomer has asked them to pull in a recent commit right here, and Cubified has popped that in. So really there's another game added here that will work on the GameCube. This pull request just has to be merged. All in all though, definitely spent a lot of time working on this because hey, this thing is awesome and it is big. It's a whole lot of games, a whole lot of consoles, and two different generations of systems. So really awesome to see overall, and Grim Doomer, awesome job and congratulations on this. It's really cool this is able to see a release. Now, a system I have a whole lot of love with, the Xbox 360, still continues to get some pretty awesome updates here and there, and this is with another application that I absolutely love. And if anybody has, I guess it works well for the 360, of course, but especially if you work on hard drives for the original Xbox, FATXplorer 3.0 has been fantastic, and the betas that Eaton releases are great because they allow you to use a lot of these like bleeding edge options for free without purchasing most of the time here, just really to test it out and make sure it works. Now, this is definitely more interesting for retail owners of the 360, and for those who do not know, if you have a hard modded system, for the most part, you can pop in a 2.5-inch drive formatted on the system and it will work. There are some limitations on there. I'm not really going to get into it here, but for the retail side of house, you cannot do that. If you want to make yourself a custom hard drive, it is limited to Western Digital drives. And unfortunately, it's like that because you can get Western Digital drives into vendor mode, and then when you do it, you can end up flashing a security sector file from an official hard drive, such as a 20 gig, 60 gig, 120, 250, and 500. Those are all the ones that are available. I think there's a 320 out there. So those are all the ones that are available. What I'm trying to say is the upper limit for retail is 500 gigabytes because you have to have that signed security sector. But you essentially do this right here. You take your Western Digital drive, you get it into vendor mode, and then you end up flashing a known security sector, so it makes it look like a Hitachi drive right here, but that's going to be one of the official drives that Microsoft had certified to work on retail. You can do this all using a tool called Hard Drive Hacker or HDD Hacker, but Eaton has definitely made something nicer called Xbox 360 HDD Maker. And he even states here, anyone who has done any sort of tinkering with Xbox 360 knows about Hard Drive Hacker. For many years, Hard Drive Hacker was the only way to make a hard drive compatible on retail 360s. It has been an incredibly useful tool and was so far ahead of its time. The developers should be commended for their work. Unfortunately, development on it stopped more than 10 years ago, and it has grown more difficult to use due to modern chipset compatibility issues. That's a big one. OEM Xbox 360 hard drives are also no longer in production. As these OEM drives start to fail, the need for a tool to make compatible drives has been growing. In Beta 32 of FATXplorer 3.0, this has a brand new solution, a tool called Xbox 360 Hard Drive Maker. He states that the goal of the project was to try and create a more accessible and easy to use alternative to Hard Drive Hacker. When you want to use Hard Drive Hacker, you have to create a bootable USB, mess around with BIOS settings, and then hope your PC's chipset will work with it. It's a bit unwieldy and can be difficult for beginners. Xbox 360 Hard Drive Maker requires none of those steps and is simply another tool you can use inside of FATXplorer. For features, it works on Windows Desktop, it works over USB, it is compatible with any PC that can run FATXplorer, and existing undo.bins are compatible. So for those who don't know, essentially when you get your drive into vendor mode, you dump the firmware flash, so to speak, on the hard drive into a undo.bin, and then you end up flashing that security sector file to the drive. But if you ever want to undo it for whatever reason, it gives you a undo.bin file, so you can always, well, undo that. Now this is the big one though. Even though we have a easier to use tool, this is still dependent on getting Western Digital drives into vendor mode. So first of all, this is only Western Digital drives. That's it. And it even says here, solid state drives are not supported. But they do state for drive compatibility, a simple test was done earlier this month. Buy Western Digital blue and black 2.5-inch drives through the Western Digital store to check if they worked. Both drives are manufactured in 2024. Unfortunately, the test failed and it was not possible to make them Xbox 360 compatible. The general advice is to find drives manufactured before 2020. After that, there is a high chance the drive comes with a locked down firmware that cannot be accessed without physically taking the drive apart. A tutorial on how to flash newer drives may come in the future for technically advanced users. But for now, make sure to purchase a drive before 2020. So that's going to be a disappointment here, where there is a compatibility list that is still being added to. So this is not going to be definitive, but this here is a limitation outside of Eaton's reach. So it's not an issue of the software itself here. It's because this has been dependent on Western Digital's vendor mode. And again, even though now we do have a much easier way of reflashing these drives to work on retail 360s, the downside here is going to be, I mean, at this point, even though this tool is new, you have to look for drives that are at minimum 4 years old. Now, he does have a frequently asked questions section at the end, so I'll kind of cover this. Because first of all, does this benefit RGH or JTAG consoles? And he states, if you want to use the same drive on retail and modded kernel, yes. Otherwise, there's no benefit to flashing that drive. Do you need any special hardware? You just need a USB to SATA adapter. He does ask here, why is Western Digital still the only supported brand? And the answer is most Western Digital hard drives share a standard firmware, which makes it easy to make a universal solution. So to anybody asking, can I use an SSD? Unfortunately not. Can I use a Seagate? Can I use a Hitachi? No. Can I get banned if I use a custom drive? At this point, he's saying, no, this has never happened. Don't worry about it. You can still set this up for Xbox backwards compatibility. You can even make this work on 3.5-inch hard drives, although he states you'll need to do a 12-volt mod on the 360 for it to be sufficiently powered. And on the topic of this here, over on Twitter, I'm kind of going to bounce over here a bit because Sky Hard Drive has said proof of concept done. A Kingston A400 240GB SSD working on a unmodded Xbox 360 through modifying the ID with the PC3000 and using a 120GB security sector. Big thanks to Eaton for the help with these security sector issues. And you can see right here, they do have the security sector showing up because they have the Microsoft logo right here, 106GB free, so that is 120GB minus the formatting. And the name here I think is pretty appropriate because that would have been, that's pretty much what I said out loud when I end up seeing this here. That's the first photo. The second one right here, you could see it is a Kingston drive. They have the software right here, and they were able to change this on the drive itself. And the third one is actually looking at the hex code right here. Do keep in mind though, with Sky's reply, they say 1, currently this is not possible without very expensive special hardware. And number 2, it only works on SSDs with compatible controllers such as a Phison PS30111 or a Silicon Motion SM2258. The reason why I bounced back and forth here, kind of similar to what I did with Tony Hawk's String Copy, is they say here, one of the questions, I saw a post on Twitter about an SSD working in retail consoles. Can Xbox 360 hard drive maker be used to make retail compatible SSDs? And the answer is, this is a new development, and Xbox 360 hard drive maker does not have SSD support right now. Specific SSDs may be supported in the future. An announcement will be made when this happens. But do keep in mind what was stated on not only Sky's post, but Eaton's post. We're going to keep this one here shorter because even though there's not going to be too much over on this GitLab page, there is something that's pretty exciting. This here is a project called Banjo-Kazooie from the Banjo-Decomp repository. But right here, you can see there's a whole lot of code that's available on this. It was created almost 4 years ago, but if we come down here, this is exciting. Banjo is now at 100%, so this means the original United States, like NTSCU 1.0 version of the Banjo-Kazooie ROM has been reverse engineered to 100%. Much like a game such as, I believe, Ocarina of Time, the Master Quest ROM, or of course Super Mario 64. But we're seeing more decompilation projects like this. But like with Banjo-Kazooie, I didn't even know this one was in progress here. So even though we have the progress report right here, and we have some simple instructions on building, prerequisites, and other versions on this, like it even says here, you can drop in US 1.1 or Japan or PAL, and just set it like that, and then you can decompile the ROM once you take it and you pair it with this and you run the decompiler on here. The point is, this here is exciting because much like what we've seen with other decompilation projects for the N64, here pretty soon we'll be able to probably see some mods for Banjo-Kazooie, some more developments on it, and of course some native ports, with most likely a PC native port of Banjo-Kazooie being released, and then we'll see mods on that. And if we see it on every single system under the sun, you know, I'm okay with that, actually. I think that's fine. Now, at the end of these episodes, I usually like to cover something that I find interesting or cool or random or funny or what have you, but kind of tangentially or even directly related in the world of modding here. And I thought this was really awesome. This is over from Segabits, and this is, getting a little more official here. But they state here, RGG studio performer Hitoshi Izawa receives Excellence Award for Model 2 and Model 3 emulation in Like a Dragon games. And breaking this down a little bit more here, we can start reading this. And they state here, esteemed Ryuga Gotoku studio performer Hitoshi Izawa is being given an Excellence Award at the latest CEDEC, or Computer Entertainment and Developers Conference, in Japan for his work on emulation of Model 2 and Model 3 arcade games in the Like a Dragon series. This news was shared yesterday on Twitter by Lost Judgment director Yukata Ito and is also being shown on the CEDEC website's top awards list. Yukata Ito's tweet was also transcribed by known Twitter translator Gosokayu. Here's what the CEDEC had to say about this honor on their website, translated to English. The committee commended the expertise and uniqueness of the effort to reproduce games for dedicated arcade hardware at the dawn of the 3DCG games, as well as the fact that through the commercialization of these games, past arcade games that were often buried in the past were brought to the attention of today's players. Ito also had more to say about what went into the development of the emulation for these games, and the difficulties of it on Twitter. You can read more about it past the break. Now, I personally haven't played these. I know I do need to fix that, but the Like a Dragon games, they do have some moments where you can go into arcades like this, and there are actual arcade games that are in here. But not only that, they're also playable to the end user. Like, you could be playing one of these games on your PS4 or PS5, and you can go here in the game and you can play these classic Sega games which are being emulated. Some of the examples we're seeing here is, for example, Virtua Fighter 3, where this is not just like something that looks fancy. This is actually playable in the game itself. It also looks like we have Spike Out right here, but they've also said that there's been some games where they do have to change them for licensing and such. Like, for example, they say a good example would be how they've renamed Daytona USA 2 to Sega Racing Classic 2, or some games just don't work as well, like Get Bass, which is Sega Bass Fishing. They state here they had an especially hard time translating the arcade game's fishing rod controller to a standard controller setup, and the game wound up being too unwieldy for players in the end. Ito-san even felt the need to personally apologize to players for this mistake. They state here that on top of that, Hitoshi Izawa was also the programmer for the Xbox 360 and PS3 digital ports of arcade games such as Virtua On, Afterburner Climax, Daytona USA, Sonic the Fighters, and Virtua Striker, as well as a programmer on Virtua Fighter 3TB Online, which was created off the work he did to bring Virtua Fighter 3TB into Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So this is really cool here, because not only this is like an Easter egg where it's not just like, hey, that's cool, it's actually playable, but I love to see that in an official stance here, and like the guy is getting awarded. He's not just getting like props online or like a thank you or something like that. Like, he is getting an award for the work that he has put in, and from what I see, it's absolutely well deserved. Either way, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. Hopefully you all enjoyed it, hopefully you all had some fun and got to learn something while being entertained along the way. Now, typically at the end of these episodes, I like to pick a keyword or a key phrase, and if you use that in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Now, typically I pick something off of my desk, and for this, we're going to use cover, because, well, I have a camera lens cover right here for the camera that I'm using. Do you have a camera lens cover? Have you lost yours before? Because I have on my previous camera, when I've gone lens coverless, I've also had to get multiple other covers, and then, I end up finding the original one, and that's not found. Or do you prefer to sleep with a cover, yes or no? If you use the word cover in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Either way, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. This is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. Until next time.